wouldn't our world be a better place if we had more of those ideals at the center of society rather than the domination, the exploitation, the predator capitalism, the greed, you know? So yes, I think, women have to find more of the traits that we might label masculine to bring themselves into wholeness, and men have to find and embrace some of the traits that we might label feminine to incorporate into themselves so that they too would be whole. In fact, it's interesting. My husband and I were taking some Kabbalah classes not that long ago, and one of the teachings that I just loved was they actually told the men in the class that until they were able to embrace their sacred feminine, they could never expect to find joy and happiness in this life. So I didn't expect that, quite frankly, from the Kabbalah class, but I thought that was a great message. But getting back to your question about the Sacred Sunday messages, they're about a lot of different things. They're about finding your sacred roar, finding your backbone, finding the gift in situations that we find challenging, about coming into wholeness. There's one message I remember I gave that I was inspired by a statue in the Louvre. It's Hermaphroditus. And you see her from one angle, it looks like she's a naked woman laying on a couch. When you see her from the other side, she has male genitals. And for me, that was a story about all of us, being able to come into wholeness. Some of these stories are about taking the sacred feminine mythology and what does it teach us to create a more sustainable future. One example is the myth of Demeter and Persephone, and the patriarchal myth of Demeter and Persephone is the one probably most of us have heard in school. It's the one where Hermes comes along and scoops Persephone up and takes her down into the underworld. Basically, he kidnaps her. In some stories, she's raped. And, when she's away in the underworld, Demeter is in mourning, so that's when we have winter. And, Hades allows Persephone to come visit her mother in the spring. And, that's when we have spring and when Demeter is happy, everything flowers and we have food. But that's the patriarchal story of Demeter and Persephone. There was an egalitarian version of Demeter and Persephone, and there was a pre-patriarchal version of Demeter and Persephone. And it's that pre-patriarchal one that I like to talk about because Hades isn't even in the story. It's just Demeter and Persephone, and it's similar in the sense that the seasons change when Demeter and Persephone are either together or apart. But the difference is Persephone willingly goes down into the underworld because she knew that the people who were there needed her. They needed an advocate. She was going to, be their champion and take care of them. And really what the story is about, it's about relationship between mothers and daughters. It's about, mothers being able to let go and allowing daughters to live their life and follow their own calling, And it's about daughters respecting mothers. And honestly, when I teach this story in Cakes for the Queen of Heaven or wherever it's appropriate, I like to extrapolate on that, to be honest, and I say this isn't just about good relationships between mothers and daughters, which sometimes can be complicated, but it's also about good relationships between women, because most of us, are either mothers or daughters, and we could use that, I think, in the world, women who support one another instead of compete with one another.
Okay, absolutely. Now, in terms of what's going on, do you look at this time as a shifting? There's actually, I think even the Mayan calendar talks about this, that we are moving into a time when the feminine is actually coming back to the fore after being somewhat submerged because of the patriarchal society that we've lived in, and that there is a rebalancing. and that it's not that suddenly the feminine or women are going to start being dominant over males, that instead this is a balancing of the sexes and really a co-creative reality.
Yes, I definitely agree that that's what's happening. As I talk about on my radio show sometimes, I believe we're living in the evolution, and we don't always see it because we have this sense of, oh, one step forward, two steps back, and sometimes it's very frustrating because we haven't achieved that balance that we so desperately want. But I think we are definitely on our way because, in the last few decades we've made so much progress. When I interview people on my show, just a few, 20 or 30 years ago, things were so different. And in one lifetime, 20 or 30 years is, maybe a quarter of a person's life. But on the big timeline of history, it's just a minute blip on the screen, And I have guests who come on my show who have been at this even longer than I, and they say, Karen, 30 years ago, we could be, one gentleman in particular who's very prominent in the community says, my house was threatened to be firebombed because I dared talk about the sacred feminine in public, because there's so much fear or intolerance, around this idea, but that's so shifted because we're finding ideas of the sacred feminine all across the globe. In fact, I interviewed a woman who had done an anthology about the sacred feminine. I think it was called The Unknown She, and I was amazed that she had found all of these people around the world who were talking about incorporating the sacred feminine in their lives and their communities, and it was none of the people that I knew at all in any of the areas of goddess that I've known for the last 20 years. So it's becoming, I think, very prevalent, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least in the next 20 years we see a real shift. It'll be there'll be no doubt that the shift has been happening, and it'll look even better to us, I think.
Absolutely. So in terms of what you see around you, and I kind of get the feeling that, like you say, your last book is leaning in the way of bringing into this world some of the concepts that you're talking about and involving activism of a kind, and also changing the world. So there's an aspect that you may be trying to encourage women or men and women to object to to what's going on here in society right now. In other words, the inequality in the workplace, to talk about that more, to get young people, for example, to make sure they stand up for themselves, and also get gender equality in all areas, regardless of really what it is. So is that something you're working on, and are you doing other work in this area?
Well, I'm still teaching about goddess. It's sort of a three-pronged approach. I teach about goddess as deity. For people who want to incorporate this into their spirituality. I talk about it from the aspect of goddess as an archetype, or, if that's a word you're not too familiar with, your listeners think of it as like a role model. And the third is the ideals. And I think, to a certain extent, it's the ideals and the archetypes that could potentially have the most impact to change the world. And, and I think we are seeing a lot of progress. For instance, maybe little things you might not even connect the dots with, but rape now is considered a weapon of war. We didn't used to think about that. We're talking about human trafficking. We're talking about female genital mutilation. I mean, look at what's happened in the NFL with domestic violence. And, you notice the NFL has these big pushes for breast cancer awareness month. I mean, they're getting much more, female friendly than they were just a year ago. They're raising their awareness. And there's lots of little things that are happening like that in all different nooks and crannies around the world. I mean, I'm getting ready to go give a talk at the Parliament, Council for the Parliament of World Religions next week. And there was a time when one of my mentors said that she got a death threat for appearing at the Parliament and dared talk about Goddess. Well, things like that just don't happen anymore. Those things are few and far between. Goddess and goddess advocates like myself, have a legitimate seat at the table now, and there are very few people who ask about the legitimacy of it. I don't think it's that long before maybe even the Vatican will wake up and decide that women can be priests, even if it's only a pragmatic decision because they need more priests, So, there are just so many different, I think, movements around the world, whether we're talking about, people who are struggling to raise awareness of climate change and trying to fight against GMOs and fracking. I mean, it's, taking care of the earth, which is Gaia, which is Mother Earth. Some people are doing it for political reasons. Some people are doing it for spiritual reasons. So there's a lot happening, I think, in all different quarters.
What I'm doing right here and now is actually asking people to put their questions in all caps. We do have an audience and we have a chat room, so it's just an opportunity for people to put their questions in at this time.
Okay.
And as we progress towards the end of the interview, I like to give people a chance to ask you their questions, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
So I was just texting them. It just makes it easier for me and, in theory, my producer, to see the questions in the chat if they are, because there's a lot of chat going on. If they're in all caps, it differentiates it very quickly to the eye. So when you're doing some of this, did you, for example, have you been continuing to explore and to go around the world to sacred sites now, or is this something that you have had less time for in the recent years? How have you sort of dealt with that?
Well, to be honest with you, I've sort of gotten the sacred travel out of my system. I still lead sacred tours now and again. If someone comes to me and they have a group, or it's a church, for instance, and they might be able to get 10 or 15 or 20 people together, I'll still lead them on a sacred pilgrimage. In fact, we're probably going to be putting one together to Turkey next year because Turkey is such a wonderful melting pot of all different cultures. But I don't do it quite so much anymore. And to be honest with you, I've been to most of the places I care to go. Some of the places I've been to 2 or 3 times, and it's got, the airlines have really taken a lot of the fun out of it. To be truthful, the idea of sitting in economy class for 12 hours to travel from point A to point B, it takes a lot to motivate me to do that again. But one thing that people have been asking me about recently is the co-opting of the name Isis, the Egyptian goddess Isis, by the media, by the terrorist groups, and and that's really quite a shame. A lot of people in the pagan community have tried to write letters to their editors, to editors of newspapers, to media outlets and things like that, to try to get people to stop using ISIS's name in vain, so to speak, and actually call the terrorist group by its right name of ISIL, but that's just one of these things I think that goddess advocates are going to have to work on, rehabilitating, not just the name of Isis, but I think they have to rehabilitate the idea of what a priestess is, rehabilitate the idea of what a pagan is, because that was always intended to be a disparaging label, that Christians used for non-Christians or people who weren't of the Abrahamic faith. There's a lot of education really to be done, and but I think with the information age we're in with the internet, it's a lot easier.
So have you decided to write another book? I understand, you've got several books out, and that's great. Are you going down a different track at this time that would lead you to write another book?
I'm thinking about it. When you start a book, you have to realize it's really a 5-year project. From the time you first put pen to paper, or you put your fingers to the keyboard, to the time you're sort of winding down on the marketing of the book after it's actually published and out there. It's really a 5-year commitment. And there is another book I'd like to write. I'm just trying to make up my mind if I want to commit the next 5 years to the writing and the editing and the promotion of it. To be frank, I would love to do a TED Talk, and I've been thinking more about trying to bring some goddess projects to internet television, or maybe even like the Smithsonian Channel or the History Channel. But still, these institutions, were very patriarchal, and they cater to the men 18 to 30. And so, ideas like this, they don't, it's hard to convince them that the ratings would be there.
Good point. Well, as you may know, we're starting an internet alternative television network here, and there may be a place for you. So we should talk after this. But we have already a number of women who are broadcasting with us, and investigators in this sort of alternative sector that we're in. So there's going to be a lot more openness to this sort of thing, at least in the sector that I'm part of, which involves the alternative world, conspiracies, and so on. And along those lines, do you find yourself ever investigating actual stories that are going on, maybe injustices in your immediate vicinity, or larger news stories where you feel that perhaps you can bring a voice to talk about those?
Well, I don't know if you'll consider this in the genre that you're inquiring about, but I really do consider goddess spirituality alternative history, because it's been so swept beneath the rug, because it's not known in a widespread manner, and there is still resistance to it out there. There are fundamentalist Christians, people of Abrahamic faiths. Think, for instance, just one example, the goddess Lilith. She's an example of a powerful woman who was demonized in Abrahamic religions because she was Adam's first wife. The story goes that, she wanted equality and she couldn't get it, so off she went, and, Adam ends up with, benign Eve, who caused all the problems for women for, the last few thousand years. But, it's this whole idea that there is so much more to the story, as I was saying in the beginning, the 30, 40,000 years that's been swept beneath the rug, that's an alternative history. There's so much that's been lost, and there's so much to learn. And so from that standpoint, I think I'm always, trying to find new archaeological discoveries, that go to proving this point. Maybe it's a new sacred site, maybe it's an artifact, maybe it's particular wording on an artifact that will shed new light or new understanding on what we thought. But there is something interesting. When I was doing the research for my Sacred Places book, I stumbled across the story of an old article that was put out by the Smithsonian about the Grand Canyon. And, there are actually peaks in the Grand Canyon named for goddesses. There's one named for Isis, another for Diana, and I forget the others. I apologize for the sirens, but if you can hear them. But anyway, this old Smithsonian article, it was dated, I think, around 1913, 1920, that suddenly no one can find anymore, but there's proof that it existed, that they actually found artifacts in a cave in the Grand Canyon, Egyptian artifacts. So I find it interesting that I don't think we really even know the true history of the United States. We'll find these out-of-place artifacts that don't agree with the timeline of history that academics want us to believe. Or even the Sphinx, for instance. There's some scientists who believe the Sphinx is eroded by water, which would make, that whole area so much older. So, those are the kinds of things I like to explore, because once I think you discover a feminine face of God and you realize that history is written by the conquerors who have their own agenda, then you start to, maybe open your mind to other alternative ideas that, just isn't what's taught in school.
Yes, no doubt about it. Well, along those lines, just briefly to get back to Egypt for a moment, what about Hathor, the goddess? Hathor, have you looked into that? And along those lines, have you looked into the ET side of that question? In other words, that we're having, ET interaction with humans here on planet Earth, and that there are a lot of feminine ETs out there that are interacting with us. And do you feel that you've had any contact yourself in that way?
Well, Hathor, I've been to her temple. I have to say I was an Isis and a Sekhmet girl, so Hathor wasn't one of the goddesses that I spent a lot of time on, quite frankly. But know the general history, but as far as Hathor associated with ETs, you'd have to tell me about that. However, that said, going back to what I said before, when some people ask me, well, do I think Isis was ever a mortal woman, or if she's from the stars or whatever? I was doing an aspecting class in my early days training as a priestess, and aspecting, I think, probably the best way to describe it, it's just another form of channeling. And in that class, I feel like I actually did channel Isis, and another woman did channel Sekhmet, interestingly. And the woman who channeled Sekhmet didn't even know anything about Sekhmet before she did the channeling work. And Sekhmet said to her that she was from the stars. And I found that very interesting. And it would not surprise me in the least if we suddenly found out one day that our DNA had been manipulated by beings from another planet. There's just too much out of place artifacts and signs out there that I think point to the possibility. And I think it calls for us to have an open mind.
Yes, absolutely. Well, as you may know, I delve into this area quite deeply, and I did just return from Turkey, for example, where they do have down at Göbekli Tepe, there is one mural of sort of on a rock face of a woman, and supposedly there are very few others that are actual feminine sort of statues from that particular site, which is rather interesting. And I don't know if that's really the case, or whether, in a sense that, you know, as we are in a male-dominated society, certain artifacts that might have been discovered were then put aside, and that we may not know, because as you may know, we have many hidden artifacts in the Vatican, for example, the underground in the Vatican, etc. So what we're really talking about, I have a whistleblower who says that what they do with some sites is they actually uncover them and then they cover them again over, because they don't want humanity to know what they are revealing about our true past. So this is what we're up against. It's quite an amazing saga.
Well, I agree. You know, and a couple things about that. You know, I know women who have gone to Göbekli Tepe, and they did find what we would consider a Sheila Nagid there. You know, a woman with her knees spread, and I mean that's an ancient symbol of the sacred feminine. And I think part of the reason, that particular relief was actually kept hidden in the caretaker's shed for a really long time. And I think part of it, it might not just be the idea to repress the feminine. I think the fact that with the Sheila, because it's, they might consider it lewd, you know, because here it is, you know, the knees are spread, you know, they're showing the genitals. And, you know, we're talking about a very conservative part of the world. You know, women wear scarves and burqas. So to, you know, to spread their legs and show their yoni, I mean, that's a little, I think, a little bit over the top for some of them. But I agree with you. You know, I've read, you know, numerous stories of women in particular, archaeologists down in South America. You know, they would discover artifacts that don't fit in with the accepted timeline, and suddenly, you know, they can't get funding anymore. You know, they're ostracized from academia, and you know, it's difficult, I think, whether you're a woman or a man, to be in that set of circumstances, because, you know, you have to play the game or lose credibility, you know, or lose funding, you know, because you need people who are going to support your dig. So, you know, you can't be this someone who they might think is on the lunatic fringe or something, because nobody's going to give you any money, so you have to play the game. And you know, I think that's unfortunate. And you know, academics find out things every day, and you know, sometimes it takes 15 or 20 years for these discoveries to actually hit the mainstream world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what is what in terms of what's going on in the news right now, and what you're coming across, is there a sense that you have that your mission is, in other words, more crucial now than ever before, or are you feeling that you're getting some help out there because there's a lot of people waking up, in a sense? I know in my particular mission that I get the sense that there is a lot of waking up going on around the planet, and that I don't feel like I'm such a person out by myself, kind of yelling from a hilltop or whatever you want to call that. So do you have a sense of that?
Well, you know, I'm laughing because, you know, sometimes myself and some of the women that I know who do this, you know, we say, okay, we're going out again today. We're blazing that trail with our pink-handled machete, you know, hacking at the vines, you know, trying to blaze the trail. But you know, the answer is yes and yes. You know, I feel like we're at a crucial time. Some people have described it, you know, we're on the tip of a knife, you know, and things can kind of go either way. So in that sense, I believe that there is a sense of urgency, you know, with climate change, with just everything that's going on out there in the world. it feels like things are moving very fast, and it's important for us to not sit back on, and rest on our laurels, but to be out there in the fray and, adding our ideas and our energy to try to create that new normal. Because, I mean, let's face it, if we do manage to shake up things, and if we want to create a new normal, then people have to feel confident that we have an alternative, to offer them. They say conservatives will support the status quo and institution, even if the status quo and institutions are oppressive, because they tend to be fear-based, and they would rather support what's organized and known than maybe take a chance on the unknown. So I think that's all the more reason to try to reach people and give them new ideas, and help them wake up and raise their awareness, help them shift their vibration to understand that it hasn't always been like this, and it shouldn't stay the way it is, and to just encourage them to find their what's that expression? I think the better angels of their nature, and strive for a world that is going to serve the most of us, the 99%, if you will. And I think more and more people are doing that. I mean, we're seeing that, I believe, in the people that are coming out supporting Bernie Sanders, for instance. The media, I think, doesn't want to give Bernie Sanders the credit he deserves, but he's drawing incredible crowds because he's talking about things that would, I think, restore some balance in the world, politically, socially, and to try to protect our social safety net and help the middle class and the poor and the 99%.
Okay, what I want to do now is actually look at the chat and see if we have any questions that we can go to, and see if there's anyone that is got anything to ask you. So if you'll bear with me, I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay. So just looking again in the chat for statements that are, or questions that people are making in all caps. And I'm going to see if I can just grab a few. It says, well, actually, there's a two-part question. I think we sort of already dealt with one of the parts. One talks about what does Karen think of ETs, and why women are hated in ancient cultures. I'm not sure what that means. I think they meant ancient cultures.
Ancient. Well, I don't think women were hated in ancient cultures. I think, first of all, it depends on how far back you go. There were cultures where we had egalitarian societies, so women were equals. I don't think it was a matter of women being hated. I think it was more the idea of men didn't want to share leadership. Men wanted to be in control. Men felt that they were entitled to be in control. I mean, look at the Bible, for instance. Men serve God, and women, the planet, and all the species on it serve men. So this is about power and control. And it's when there's only two genders on the planet, and you want to be the one calling the shots. Well, you make the other gender subservient. So I don't think it's a matter of hate. I think it's just a matter of imbalance and a power struggle.
Okay, just looking to see if there are other questions. Someone wants to know if, let's see, it's, what do you think the goddess Sekhmet archetypally represents?
Well, you know, Sekhmet is one of those goddesses in her myths that really needs to be rehabilitated because what we're left with is a patriarchal myth. And if you read the myth, Sekhmet comes across as really no more than a mercenary for her father, the sun god Ra. Ra is upset with humanity because he thinks that they haven't been behaving very well. So he sends Sekhmet out to punish them. But she, you know, she goes a little, goes a little crazy and overboard, and she starts murdering humanity, and she has to be drugged to stop the killing spree. Well, what feminist scholars will tell you is that that is a patriarchal myth, that that myth is about perpetuating the idea that women are over-emotional, that women can't be trusted, men shouldn't trust women shouldn't trust their own power. And, you know, who does that serve? It certainly doesn't serve women. It just sort of plays into that whole idea, women can't be trusted with power, women can't be trusted with leadership. And if you're telling women that, they should be afraid of their own power, well, that's sending them the message that, they should continue to be subservient and let men, rule the day and tell them what to do. Now, the idea of